Oh, how do I go only 1 week and batteries are already red again? I need batteries again. I know that I think maybe it might have got left on or something. I don't know. All right, good morning, everyone. First thing you might notice is no more yellow lines on the projector. Brian helped me out with that yesterday. We got the new one put up there, and so it should be a little clearer. I'm not promising any less problems, because a lot of the problems we encounter are user malfunction, right? Because we don't know what we're doing. But that's okay too. So today we're starting a new class, class I've never attempted to teach before, Isaiah. And there's a reason for that. It's intimidating. And the book of Isaiah is not an easy one to, I don't want to say it's not easy to understand, but in some cases it is difficult to understand. And it might even be an understatement to say that it's difficult to understand. As you go through the book of Isaiah, you're going to see what I'm talking about. Isaiah is an amazing prophet. What we find a lot of times as you're reading through the book of Isaiah is one moment you are in the present. You are talking, or Isaiah is talking about what is happening in that moment. And then the next second, he's talking about something that's going to happen in the very present future. And not long after that, he's talking about something that happens 200 years in the future or 700 years in the future. And so it can be a little confusing to track that, but it's not impossible. And that's why we want to look at it the way I'm going to present it. I thought about doing a verse-by-verse study through the book, but I've changed my mind. What we're going to do is look at how the book is written. I'm going to do an introduction today, and then we'll spend a few weeks looking at how the book is written, and then we're going to be looking at some specific texts and how they're very popular texts. So some of this, and I'm sorry, we're probably going to overlap one another a little bit, me and Darren, with the Messianic prophecies, because Isaiah has quite a few Messianic prophecies. But anyway, I have here a handout. Brian, would you mind helping me with this? This handout is an Old Testament survey, okay? And if you could just get one to everybody. And that'll help us to kind of see where we are in the chronological timeline. Somebody mentioned to me recently as they were doing their own personal Bible study how when you read from Genesis through to Revelation, it can be a little confusing, especially going through the Old Testament, because it's not chronological in order. Well, some of it is, but you get to 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and then you move over into Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, all of these, and then all of the major prophets and the minor prophets. And what ends up happening is the major prophets and the minor prophets all happen during 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, right? Psalms, Proverbs, that's David and Solomon. That's during these other books of history. So the best way to kind of look at 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles is that's the record of history, and then these are the men that were living during that time when we look at the prophets. And Isaiah, of course, is one of those prophets. Isaiah will put to use many different literary devices. He uses poetry, Hebrew poetry, a lot in his writing, so it helps to understand Hebrew poetry. So we'll look at some of that. Also, Hebrew prophecy is different from some other writings, and so we'll look into that a little bit as well. So let's have a look at our Old Testament survey just to kind of get an idea of where we are. We're just about finished handing that out. Isaiah will talk about several events in time before his ministry. So looking back at the history of the Jews, he's going to mention some things from their past, and so we'll look at in this survey where that is. So let's review a little bit here. So we have the period of time, and is Mac here today? Oh, he's in the other class. Okay. I was going to ask him something, but I forget he's not in here. Yeah. Well, Matt gave me a green laser pointer because Matt can't see red. And so he's like, I can't see when you're pointing on the screen with a laser pointer. So he gave me a green laser pointer, except Matt gave me a green laser pointer that if I turn it on, you can see it across town. I'm not exaggerating. You can see it across town. Yes, you do not want to look at this light. And so when you shine it on the screen, it reflects off the screen and onto the ceiling. So it's a little overpowered. So I might have to try to find another laser pointer with a little less power. Anyway, so we have our period, our time, the events and characters, our people in that time, and then the books and chapters that we have in it. So antediluvian, deluge, the flood. So this is before, pre-flood. All right. So 5,000 plus BC, we have those Genesis 1 through 8, the creation, the fall, promise of redemption, Genesis chapter 3, and then the increasing sin, and then what follows that is the flood with Noah. Then we have post-diluvian. So this is going to be after the flood, right? Genesis 9 through 11. We see the genealogies of the sons of Noah, right? And so everyone that survived the flood going forward, we have their genealogies. But then also increasing of sin again with the Tower of Babel and God dispersing people on the earth. Then we get into Genesis 12. Remember, that's where God promises Abraham that through his seed all nations of the earth would be blessed. That's when we see patriarch system really intact around 2000 BC. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob's sons. And of course, where do they end up? In Egypt, in bondage. That's our next period, that period of bondage around 1600 BC. 400 years in Egypt. Moses comes, God chooses Moses to deliver him. We see the Passover mentioned there. And then the Exodus chapters 1 through 12. The next chapter the next section is when they're in the wilderness, right? This is the conquest, but it's going to also include that time when they're in the wilderness. Exodus 13 through all of these books, all the way up through 1 Samuel 1 through 10. This includes Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. This is they arrive into the Promised Land. Remember when they go over the Jordan River with Joshua and Jericho, the fall of Jericho, and everything after that, leading up to, what do they ask for? Give us a king like all the other nations. And that's where we are at this point. They're asking for their king. So they ask for their king. Now we move into our next section because think about the kings, right? They had Saul and then David and then Solomon. And of course they had their ups and downs and hiccups throughout there. But after Solomon, who reigned after Solomon? His son Rehoboam, right? But Rehoboam I was just reading this yesterday. Rehoboam, his dad has died, right? And so now he's king, and the people come to him and ask him, including Jeroboam, to lessen the load that his father had placed upon them. And he says, well, come back to me in 3 days, and I'm going to let you know what I decide. So he takes counsel with the older men. What do the older men suggest that he do? Lessen the load. They're going to listen to you. They're going to follow you. He says, okay, let me go and talk to my friends, my buddies. And of course, his buddies give him really bad advice, those young men. They say, go and tell them, you think my dad was bad. You wait until you see what I'm going to do. My dad, he disciplined you with the whip, right? And I'm going to discipline you with scorpions. That's right, scorpions. So anyway, of course, folks didn't want to listen to that. And Jeroboam receives prophecy from God through one of the prophets that he's going to lead the 10 tribes of Israel. So the kingdom divides, right? So we have the northern kingdom of the 10 tribes, and then the southern kingdom, which included Judah and Benjamin. And that's Rehoboam is reigning over that. Jeroboam would reign over the others. So what we see in the divided kingdom, around 800 years before Christ, what do we have? We have the establishment of the two kingdoms, but then also after that, we're going to see apostasy, destruction of the northern kingdom, and then the emergence of many prophets. So this is 1 Kings 12 through 2 Chronicles 36, and then we see these prophets: Isaiah, Hosea, Micah, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Jeremiah, and Zephaniah. Now, all of those prophets did not prophesy at the same time. We're talking about a 100-year period. So Isaiah and Jeremiah are not at the same time. Jeremiah is a little bit later, okay? So we'll see I'll talk about some of these that are at the same time, but these are not. We see the apostasy taking place right as the kingdom divides. Right as the kingdom divides. Did you guys get it's okay. I like to embarrass people when they come in late. It's all right. No, I'm just teasing. Here. That is our... Do you need one too? Oh, okay. All right. Something that kind of struck me yesterday was this apostasy. Does anyone know what Jeroboam, who, God told Jeroboam, you're going to reign over these 10 tribes. Do you know what Jeroboam did after the kingdoms divided with the Levites? He kicked them out. All the Levites, all the priests, he kicked them out. And then he established his own priesthood. And they worshiped a goat god. They worshiped these golden calves that he had created. And you wonder why there's apostasy. Now, wonder why there's never a good king in the northern tribes. I mean, it didn't start out all that great, did it? There's no spiritual leadership. This is what we're finding now with these kingdoms. Now, next we have the exile. So this is some of the stuff that Isaiah is going to be prophesying about as well. So after Isaiah and these you see Jeremiah is one of the prophets during this time. They're going into Babylonian captivity. Jerusalem is destroyed by Babylon. But then in the next section, we have a restoration around 500 years before Christ. We have the return of the remnant. Who led in that return? We studied about that recently. Ezra and Nehemiah, that's right. And so they led some of the people back into, and of course, who was the king of the Medes and Persians at that time? It was at the time that Nehemiah went back, was Cyrus, right? Yep. so they go back. And then 100 years later, we have silence begin. And there is a period of silence between the last book of the Old Testament, Micah, right, Malachi, all of these prophets, and the New Testament. We don't see any inspired writings, any prophetic writings. What we do see are some of these secular writings that are referred to as apocryphal or hidden writings, with Esdras, Judith, and Maccabees, just recording some of the history that took place during that time. So and then that leads right up into the time of Christ. So Isaiah, we learn a lot about him just from his book, but he's also mentioned so many times in the Bible. Isaiah was the son of Amoz, and Amoz, of course, is mentioned numerous times in connection with Isaiah, but no further information is given about him in Scripture. Isaiah is considered a major prophet along with Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. The difference between a major prophet and a minor prophet is what? The length of the book. Has nothing to do with the individual. It's the length of the book, and a major prophet and minor prophet is not a biblical term. That's a term we have come up with that students of the Bible have come up with to distinguish them. So when we say major prophet, we just mean there's a lot of chapters, okay? There's a lot of chapters, or there's several chapters. So Isaiah is one of those. Isaiah's book appears first among the major prophets. He is sometimes referred to as the Prince of Prophets. And as we look at his writings, we're going to see why that is. His stand out from other prophetic writings. His name means the Lord saves, or Jehovah is salvation. And this was noted several times in the Old Testament timeline. Isaiah lived and prophesied during the same time as, I don't have that on my slide here, but Amos, Hosea, and Micah. And I didn't create these slides, so don't come give me credit for it. I have a good source for those, and they were very good, so I wanted to share them with you. We know that his ministry began around 740 BC, because in chapter 6, verse 1, look at chapter 6, verse 1. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne. All right, so he identifies the exact year when his prophetic ministry begins, and through secular writings, we know exactly when that was, 740 BC, because secular history records when King Uzziah died. Now, turn over to chapter 8, verse 3. Chapter 8, verse 3. And there we read, "And I went to the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. Then the Lord said to me, call his name Mahir Shalal Hashbaz." So Isaiah's wife is referred to here as a prophetess. Now, whether this is just a reference to her being the wife of a prophet, or if in some way she prophesied and that's why she's referred, we don't know, because if she did prophesy, none of that is actually recorded in history. We do know that the names of her children were prophetic in nature. God gives those names to Isaiah, and he gives those to the children. Now, one of his sons is named Shear Jashub, and that is the remnant returns. And you can see how with each one of the names of his sons, it's emphasizing the prophecy that Isaiah is going to be giving, and he's prophesying during the time of several kings. We'll get to that in a minute. Well, it's just right there in verse 1. The vision of the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. So we see a time frame, not just when it began, but the length of time that Isaiah's prophecy was covering. Now, which tribe or which part of the divided kingdom is Isaiah prophesying mostly towards? It says right here in verse 1, Judah and Jerusalem. That's right, Judah and Jerusalem. Now, the other son, his name, Mahir Shalal Hashbaz, means haste. Each one is a word in his name. Haste, spoil, speed, pray. All right. And this particular name implied the eventual attack of the Assyrians. Now, this first one, the remnant returns. When does the remnant return? Now, think about it. Remember, look at your Old Testament survey. Isaiah and the one that's highlighted, right? That's when Isaiah is living. But when does the remnant return? Isaiah is living in the 700s, right? So it's hundreds of years later, right? But his son's names, his first son's name is the remnant is going to return. So here is a prophecy in the name of his son that after Judah or Jerusalem is destroyed by Babylon and they are in captivity for 70 years, a remnant will eventually return. And then the second son's name is about the eventual attack of the Assyrians on the northern kingdom of Israel. So Isaiah's prophecies, while he's specifically in the southern kingdom, he does address some of the things that happen with the northern kingdom as well. I think it is interesting to note that there are prophets in the Old Testament who were married. We're told about some of their marital situations in the Old Testament. Can you think of any? Hosea, yeah, everybody, because everybody feels sorry for him, right? Because God told him basically to go and marry someone who's going to be unfaithful to him, because it would be an image of Israel's faithfulness to God or unfaithfulness to God. And so Hosea marries a prostitute. Who else? Jeremiah. Anybody? Jeremiah? Jeremiah was celibate. He didn't get married. That was a trick question, I guess. What about Ezekiel? My slides aren't turning. I think maybe you clicked off of it on accident or my battery's dead. Thank you. Oh, that kind of gives it all away, doesn't it? So what happened with Ezekiel's wife? She died, but there's a little bit more to it. After she dies, Ezekiel points out that what? God did not allow him time to mourn this, which would emphasize more prophecy about the rapid nature of things happening. But anyway, he was not allowed to mourn. And then, of course, Isaiah is mentioned as well. It seems that she could have potentially been collaborating with him as a prophet. So his ministry is during the time of these four kings in Judah: Uzziah, Ahaz, Jotham, and Hezekiah. Now, as we read through some of the text in the book of Isaiah, what we're going to see is Isaiah has ready access. Or if you go back to 1 Chronicles and you read through some of this, you're going to see Isaiah right there in with the king, talking to the king, You might just automatically assume, well, the king wants access to prophets of God. That wasn't always the case. They sometimes would have trouble getting their message heard. But it is believed that, we don't know this for sure, but Amos is suspected to be the brother of Amaziah. Amaziah, another name for Uzziah. Okay, so related to the king. If that's the case, then that explains a lot as to why he's so has such an easy time getting it. Others have suspected that, well, maybe Isaiah just came from a very fluent family, so well-known family that just had a lot of access and power to All right. Now, if in fact Isaiah was from an affluent family, this does not keep him from thinking about the poor, keep him from thinking about those who, like the widows and the orphans, who injustice had been visited upon them, much like other prophets, Amos and Hosea and Micah, who spoke out about these injustices. Isaiah spoke about this as well. Turn with me to Hebrews chapter 11. What do we find in Hebrews chapter 11? Yeah, faith, right? This is that chapter on faith. And Brian, would you read verse 37 for me?
They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in the skins of sheep and goats, and destitute and afflicted and mistreated.
All right, so Isaiah proclaims his prophecy boldly, right, fearlessly, but history tells us that Manasseh, the king, had Isaiah sawn in half. And if you read much about Manasseh, you probably aren't all that surprised. He wasn't exactly a great guy. Of course, at the end of his life, we do see him repenting in a fashion before God, and God hearing him. But he was quite the character. Anyway, the point is, Isaiah had a rough ending for sure. Here's a little bit of a map to kind of give you an idea of where everybody's at. We have the Assyrians over here. Remember Nineveh, this is them. Then we have Babylon south of them. So what's going to happen is Assyria will take over and take Judah captive, Israel captive. And then what will happen is Babylon will follow. Babylon is going to rule the world. They will conquer Assyria. They will, of course, carry away God's people as well. During this time, the Assyrian empire of the Assyrian, it's on the decline, really. Under Tiglath-Pileser III, he reigned in 745 to 727 BC, the Assyrians, swept westward over here to Aram. And we'll read a little bit about Aram and Israel, the northern kingdom, kind of teaming up to stand against Assyria, and then even asking Judah to go along with them. And what do you know what Judah does? The king in Judah, he actually contacts Assyria and sets up some stuff, some back dealings, and attacks their relatives there, the northern kingdom. But they continued, the Assyrians did, downward into Israel, and in response, King Aram and the Israelites tried to pressure the king of Judah, Ahaz. You know much about Ahaz. You know he wasn't exactly the greatest king either, but they double-crossed. That's Isaiah chapter 7, or Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah chapter 7, Isaiah is going to condemn this behavior because it's known that Ahaz is double-crossing Israel, that he's attacking his own brethren, and so Isaiah condemns him publicly. Assyria did help Judah, conquering and deporting the northern kingdom. Can you imagine? He's gone so far as to have his own relatives deported into exile. So,
Just looking at that map, John,
yeah,
thinking about today,
yeah.
what all has been going on there
Forever, right? Since the beginning. Imagine the amount of turmoil just in that location. So Assyria has this desire for complete domination, world domination. Well, at least a domination of this area. And in 701, King Sennacherib of Assyria even threatens Jerusalem. Okay, so remember, Jerusalem is in Judah. And it was Ahaz in Judah that had asked the king of Assyria help him against the northern tribe of Israel and Aram. And he did. He went in and he carried away these folks. But now there's no one here. There's no one here to protect Judah's northern flank. And so what happens a little while later? They come after them as well. The godly king Hezekiah, he prays, he's next, right? He's next. And he prayed earnestly. Isaiah prophesied that God would force the Assyrians to withdraw. And they did. We see that in Isaiah 7, verses 6 and 7. But nevertheless, Isaiah warned that because of Judah's sins, she would be defeated and brought into Babylonian captivity, the nation that would eventually defeat the Assyrians. And that fall, the Babylonians coming in and destroying Jerusalem is not going to happen until 586 BC. That's more than 100 years later after Isaiah would prophesy that it would happen. So these are things that we see during the time of Isaiah's 100 years of prophecy. The destruction of Judah, or just over 100 years. That foreign exile, 70 years in Babylon, and the eventual restoration of the people from captivity. And of course, then they're going to, that's the decree of Cyrus in 538 BC. Remember the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is whose cupbearer? Artaxerxes. And eventually he's going to allow him to send people back to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls. Isaiah's many visions and prophecies spoke of people and events in the present, in the future, and in the distant future, all which makes this a very dynamic book, but also can be a little confusing to study. So, let me explain what we're going to do next. Next, I think it is microphone number 5, so unmute number 5. I've already got the volume set. I believe it should be about halfway up or something like that. Okay, yeah, I tested it yesterday. I didn't remember which one it is. So this is a video. It's about 8 minutes long, and we have about 9 minutes of class left. This video is from a group called Bible Project. You might have seen some of their videos on YouTube. As they're describing a book of the Bible, they're drawing along the way. So you'll see the drawings as they go along. This is not, these are not members of the church, okay? I want to put that out there. But this video is accurate. I've gone through it, and it is a great explanation of the first half of the book of Isaiah. So we're going to watch this together. And if you do happen to go and look at some of their other videos, they have some great explanations, especially some of the Old Testament books. But just remember, it is a denominational group, so you will find some denominational content on it. All right, let's see if this is going to work. Yeah, I already talked about that. There we go.
The book of the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah lived in Jerusalem in the latter half of Israel's kingdom period, and he spoke on God's behalf to the leaders of Jerusalem and Judah. He spoke, first of all, a message of God's judgment. He warned Israel's corrupt leaders that their rebellion against their covenant with God would come at a cost, that God was going to use the great empires of Assyria and after them Babylon to judge Jerusalem if they persisted in idolatry and oppression of the poor. But that announcement was combined with a message of hope. Isaiah believed deeply that God would one day fulfill all of his covenant promises, that he would send a king from David's line to establish God's kingdom, remember 2 Samuel 7, that he would lead Israel in obedience to all of the laws of the covenant made at Mount Sinai, remember Exodus chapter 19. And all of this was so that God's blessing and salvation would flow outward to all of the nations, like God promised to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. And it's this hope that compelled Isaiah to speak out against the corruption and idolatry of Israel in his day. Now, the book has a pretty complex literary design, but there's one simple way to see how it all fits together. Chapters 1 through 39 contain 3 large sections that develop Isaiah's warning of judgment on Israel. And it all culminates in an event pointed to at the end of chapter 39, the fall of Jerusalem and the exile of the people to Babylon. But in chapters 1 to 39, there's also a message of hope that after the exile, God's covenant promises would all be fulfilled. And chapters 40 to 66 pick up that promise of hope and develops it further. In this video, we're just going to focus on chapters 1 to 39. The first main section focuses on Isaiah's vision of judgment and hope for Jerusalem, and it begins as Isaiah accuses the city's leaders of covenant rebellion, idolatry, injustice, and God says he's going to judge the city by sending the nations to conquer Israel. Isaiah says that this will be like a purifying fire that burns away all that's worthless in Israel in order to create a new Jerusalem that's populated by a remnant that has repented and turned back to God. And Isaiah says that that's when God's kingdom will come and all nations will come to the temple in Jerusalem and learn of God's justice, bringing about an age of universal peace and harmony. Now, it's this basic storyline of the old Jerusalem purifying judgment into the new Jerusalem. This is going to get repeated over and over throughout the book, getting filled in with increasing detail. So, at the center of this section is Isaiah's grand vision of God sitting on his throne in the temple. And he's surrounded by these heavenly creatures that are shouting that God is holy, holy, holy. And Isaiah suddenly realizes just how corrupt he and his people Israel are. And he's certain that he's going to be destroyed by God's holiness, but he's not. God's holiness, in the form of this burning coal, comes and burns him, but not to destroy. Rather, it purifies him from his sin. And as Isaiah ponders the strange experience, God commissions him with a very difficult task. He is to keep announcing this coming judgment, but because Israel has reached a point of no return, his warnings are going to have a paradoxical effect of hardening the people. But Isaiah is to trust God's plan. Israel is going to be chopped down like a tree and left like a stump in a field. And that stump will itself be scorched and burned. But after all of that burning, God says that this smoldering stump is a holy seed that will survive into the future. It's a small sign of hope, but who or what is that holy seed? The rest of this section offers an answer. Isaiah confronts Ahaz, a descendant of David and a king of Jerusalem, and he announces his downfall. God says that it's the great empire of Assyria who will first chop Israel down and devastate the land, but there's hope. Because of God's promise to David, he's going to send after this destruction a new king named Emmanuel, which means God with us. And Emmanuel's kingdom is going to set God's people free from violent, oppressive empires. And Isaiah describes this coming king as a small shoot of new growth that will emerge from the old stump of David's family. It's this king that's the holy seed from chapter 6. And the king is going to be empowered by God's Spirit to rule over a new Jerusalem and bring justice for the poor, and all nations will look to this messianic king for guidance. His kingdom will transform all creation, bringing peace. Now, you finish chapters 1 through 12 with a pretty good understanding of Isaiah's message of judgment and hope. But when will this all happen? Isaiah saw another empire arising after Assyria, and that's Babylon, who would also attack Jerusalem and actually succeed in destroying it. And that brings us into the next sections of the book. So first, we have a large collection of poems that explore God's judgment and hope for the nations. We learn, first of all, of the fall of Babylon and Israel's neighbors. Isaiah could see that Assyria's world power would one day be replaced by the empire of Babylon, a nation even more destructive and arrogant. And Babylon's kings claimed that they were higher than all other gods, and so God vows to bring Babylon down. And not only Babylon. Isaiah goes on to list Israel's neighbors, accusing them all of the same kind of pride and injustice, and he predicts their ultimate ruin. But remember, for Isaiah, God's judgment is never the final word for Israel or the nations. And that leads into the next section with a series of poems that tell a tale of two cities. There's the lofty city that has exalted itself above God and become corrupt and unjust. This city is an archetype of rebellious humanity, and is described with language that's all borrowed from Isaiah's earlier descriptions of Jerusalem and Assyria and Babylon, all put together. This city is destined for ruin, and one day is going to be replaced by the New Jerusalem, where God reigns as king over a redeemed humanity from all nations, and there's no more death or suffering. These chapters are the climax to this section, and it shows how Isaiah's message pointed far beyond his own day. It was a message for all who are waiting for God to bring his justice on violent, oppressive kingdoms and bring his kingdom of justice and peace and healing love. The following section returns the focus to the rise and fall of Jerusalem. And first we find a whole bunch of poems where Isaiah accuses Jerusalem's leaders for turning to Egypt for military protection against Assyria. He knows this will backfire, and Isaiah says that only trust in their God and repentance can save Israel now, which gets illustrated by the following story about the rise of Hezekiah, king of Jerusalem. Just as Isaiah predicted, the Assyrian armies come and try to attack the city, and so Hezekiah humbles himself before God, and he prays for divine deliverance, and the city is miraculously saved overnight. But Hezekiah's rise is immediately followed by his fall. So he hosts a delegation from Babylon, and he tries to impress them by showing everything in Jerusalem's treasury and temple and palaces. It's clearly an effort to make another political alliance for protection. Isaiah hears about this, and he confronts Hezekiah for his foolishness. He predicts that this ally will one day betray him and return as an enemy to conquer Jerusalem. And we know from 2 Kings chapters 24 and 25 that Isaiah was right. Over 100 years later, Babylon would turn on Jerusalem, come and destroy the city, its temple, and carry the Israelites away to exile in Babylon. And so all of Isaiah's warnings of divine judgment in chapters 1 to 39 lead up to this moment. He's shown to be a true prophet because it all came to pass like he said. But remember, the purpose of God's judgment was to purify Jerusalem and bring the holy seed and messianic kingdom over all nations. And it's that hope that gets explored in the next part of the book. But for now, that's what Isaiah chapters 1 to 39 are all about.
All right, thank you for your attention and your comments. I think can you turn the live stream off for a minute? I have to make an announcement.